Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
a podcast for parents, college counselors, students, and anyone who wants a weekly deep dive into the world of college admissions.
Hi, I'm Susan, and I'm a college counselor and have read applications for a small liberal arts college and 2 research universities. My twins are recent college graduates.
I'm Lisa, and I'm a clinical psychologist and college counselor. I have a daughter in college, a daughter in high school, and a son in middle school. After 30 years in Chicago, we recently moved to North Carolina.
My name is Mark. I'm a college coach in Atlanta and the parent of 2 daughters. Karis, a graduate of Davidson College, and she is the founder of the Spanish tutoring company, SpanishHelpToday.com. And Joy is a wellness coach at Keenan Flagler Business School, University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. And I'm so blessed to be able to work alongside both my beautiful daughters at School Match for You, a college counseling firm that I founded in 2010. Good morning, friends. I'm back from Bermuda. I'm revived. I'm invigorated. I had an A+ time. You know, I never knew if I'd like a cruise because I'd never been on one before. We cruised out of Brooklyn, and a lot of people don't know this about me, but I'm a total extrovert one-on-one, but I'm a total introvert in groups. So there are like 5,600 people on this boat, but I loved it. I loved the balcony view, and I would definitely do it again. Of course, it's not without its challenges. You know, my brother told me it was our 8th time to Bermuda. He's Mr. Memory Banks. He knows this stuff. In fact, he literally can go back the last 52 weekends and tell you everything he did on the weekend. I can't even do that for 2 weeks. But every time you go to Bermuda, all your relatives are like, don't get the bike. Don't get the bike. Because, of course, they see all these accidents when you're driving around from tourists. But my favorite thing to do in Bermuda is to get a motorbike and drive throughout the whole entire island. It's only like 2 miles by like 23, 24 miles. And so since 16, I've been doing that. And wouldn't you know, I'm a block away from returning the bike. And it's the first time Joy's ever had a bike. And it's pouring rain. And so she wobbles in front of me, and I don't want to hit her. So I slam on the brakes and crash. So don't worry. No need to go to the doctor. I'm good. Although if you were to see me on Zoom, you'd see a big giant Band-Aid under my elbow. So it wasn't without its events, but it wasn't without its trauma, but sensational time. All right, let's talk about today's episode. So I've got 4 announcements. And then 2 really important developments happened this week that are so important. I feel I do need to share them with you. And then we'll have our panel discussion that Lisa led with 4 parents, all podcast listeners, all from different parts of the country, on the stress that their student is experiencing. So that'll be a 2-parter. You'll hear first half today and the second half next week. But let's start with our up-and-coming events. So we're just 6 days away. Next Sunday, Torito Leonardo and Chris Leonardo, husband and wife team, 2 attorneys who are just people I've come to really love and respect. Anyone who listens to this, who signs up, is going to be really in for a treat. Completely different lawyers, both nationally acclaimed in their own right. Torito, sex crimes is what she's been prosecuting at a very high level. And then Chris on the more corporate side, working with a lot of things from hedge funds and a number of other things. So completely different perspectives. So listen, if your student is even considering law, you should sign up. College counselors, public, private, independent, day boarding, CBO, tell your students if you're even considering a law career, you're going to want to attend this 1-hour session. It's on Sunday, the 14th of September, 7 to 8 Eastern time, 4 to 5 Pacific time. And all you have to do is go to yourcollegeboundkid.com and go to the resources tab, and you're going to see it right away. It's the 3rd thing under the resources tab. It says lawyer Q&A on 9/14. Just fill out that form, and we'll get the Zoom link out to you on the 12th. I'm very excited about that and hope you'll sign up. So I'm kind of doing these announcements with you, in the order they're coming up. So the next one is our admissions case studies. Now, the Lisa parent panel discussion is going to run today, the 8th, and tomorrow, the 15th. So on the 22nd, you will hear the first discussion from an 8-member panel comprised of 3 seasoned admission officers, including our own Hillary Dickman. And we have admission officers from Grinnell College and from CU Boulder. So wide perspective, and 5 of our parents who are regular listeners. And they're going to be discussing a student, and whether to admit the student or what they thought of the student. But in order for you to really maximize and get the most out of it, you need to read their file. And I had an epiphany this week, because every time I've brought this up, I've been talking as if I'm speaking to parents, because we mostly have parents as listeners. But my epiphany was, this is something students need to do. And I've been telling all my students to do it. And they're all agreeing to it because they're curious. Just how is the sausage made? I want you to think of this as if you had a chance to be a fly on a wall for 2.5 hours to hear an admissions committee discuss how decisions are made. You're going to learn a lot. That's how long their recording went, 2.5 hours. So, part of me thought, are people really going to do it? People are busy. But here's a way that I think will make it a lot easier for you. So, first of all, you got to go to the same place, your collegeboundkid.com resources tab, and you'll see the second thing under that tab says YCBK admission case studies. Okay, when you log into that, it's a Google form, but you'll see a link immediately that will take you out to a Google Doc where you'll see the entire admission files for 3 applicants. So just take the first student this week, not this week. If you want to read it just before the 22nd to keep it fresh on your mind, that's fine. Alana is the first student up, I'm pretty sure. Just read her file, because that week will be a discussion about Alana, and you can do it for all 3 students. You can read the file before the week, take your notes, and then the final week you'll hear who they admitted. So yeah, you need to go back and decide you got to admit one, deny one, waitlist one. But the way to maximize the learning experience is to read everything, then listen to the discussion, read everything for the next student, listen to the discussion, read everything for the third student, listen to the discussion, cast your vote. So I'm asking you, if you're a college counselor, tell your students about this. And if you're a parent and you want to know how the sausage is made, participate in this. Cannot think of a better way for you to understand how this stuff works. Most people understand that grades count in college admissions. They understand grade trends count. They understand things like academic rigor count. They understand things like institutional priorities and the school you're coming from, and things like the extracurriculars and what your counselor says and what your teacher says and the writing, the personal statement and the college specific. They understand those things count. But what they don't understand is, how does all of it fit together? Do certain things count more than other things? That's what you're going to learn if you go through this process. So I want to really promote it, because I can think of a better thing we've done in 8.5 years of this podcast to really help people understand how colleges make decisions than do this. So you can probably tell I'm pretty stoked. So that's going to go live, that first discussion, on the 22nd. But all you need to do is just read one file at a time, one file a week for the first 3 weeks. But my message now to you parents is, tell your student to do this. All right, so that's the second announcement. The third is for our Counselor Connect group. Jed Appleruth, a national scholar, is coming on the 28th of September to let us know about all the changes going on in the ACT. So you're going to want to put that on your calendar, 8 to 9 Eastern, 7 to 8 Central, 6 to 7 Mountain, and 5 to 6 Pacific. Just make sure that's on your calendar. If you're a college counselor, you're not a member of our Counselors Connect group, you can see an application in that same place, yourcollegeboundkid.com, under the resources tab. And the last one is our survey. Friends, I want to thank you. Thank you. When we did our last survey, which we started in 2021 and finished it up in 2022, around 220 of you completed the survey. So going into this one, I was like, well, I definitely want us to beat that number. And I was talking with Sarah early on, and I said, I think I want to make an announcement to our listeners and say, can we get 300? And she's like, I don't think you should do that, because you might get more than that. We already have 320? More than 100 more. And of course, now I'm greedy. I want to see, can we get to 400? All right, we're down to like 22 days left because we're closing this thing out on September 30th. But you're going to start to see changes immediately based on your feedback. A number of you have spoken up and said things like, boy, I'd like to hear more from this co-host, or I'd like for you to talk more on this topic, or do college spotlights on this college spotlight, and all that stuff we're going to incorporate. So this is your chance to help improve our podcast. Just go to yourcollegebornkid.com resources tab. The first thing you'll see is the YCBK listener survey. Can you help us get to 400? We're only 80 people away, and we're closing it out in 22 days. All right. So I mentioned there were a couple things that happened in college admissions this week that I felt I just could not ignore. There's a reason why I record these a day before they go live. And that's in case some big news breaks. I mean, I want to be coming on here, talking to you about, let's say, whatever, come on here and let's say I'm talking to you about the importance of grades in college or something like that. And it turns out like, whatever, there's an earthquake that hits the country and people are just devastated. And it's the only thing on people's minds. I mean, you talk like you're way out of touch with what's going on in the world. And then there's earthquakes that happen in the world of college admissions. And a couple of them happened this week. And so, when I was a kid, sometimes people would say, I've got some news for you, but I've got some good news and I've got some bad news. What do you want to hear first, the good news or the bad news? And I would always say, I want to hear the bad news first. Like the idea is, let's get the bad news out of the way. Let me stomach it. And then I can move on to the good news and let's end on an upbeat. Well, I still do that as an adult. So I feel there's some bad news and some good news in college admissions. So I'm going to start with the bad news. And we have a text group amongst ourselves, our co-hosts, and we were blowing it up this week talking about this. It was almost a little bit like a morgue amongst us. If you're a regular listener to our podcast, you've heard us talk about landscape a lot. Landscape allows an admission officer to take the context of the student and the background and the school they're coming from into consideration. So I want to read to you a statement that came out from Kedra Ishep from the College Board. Remember, Landscape's a College Board product. So here's what it said. Since 2016, Landscape has provided consistent information about high schools and neighborhoods to help colleges understand more about where students live and learn. Now listen to this. You have to clearly see the subtext so you can see what's going on here. It was intentionally developed without the use or consideration of data on race or ethnicity. Why would you even put that in? All right, let's keep reading. As federal and state policy continues to evolve around how institutions use demographic and geographic information in admissions, we are making a change to ensure our work continues to serve students and institutions. We have decided to discontinue Landscape. We will continue to provide colleges and universities with data on SAT and AP performance, and we remain committed to supporting educational opportunity and meeting the needs of institutions and students alike. Now, that's from Kedra Isham. Now, I completed a program at Harvard in 2019. It's like training for admission officers. You may have heard my interview with Raymond Blakely. I talked about, that's the last time I saw him. He was in the program as well. And Kedra Isham was one of our instructors at the program. At that time, she was over the University of Michigan's admission office. And I have had a chance to talk to her. And I know Kedra Isham absolutely believes in this. This is not something people are doing because they want to do it. They're just afraid of DJT and his backlash against anything to do with race in any way, shape, or form. And they're scared. That's what's going on. And so rather than be a target, get rid of the program. And it's happening all across the country. It's extremely disappointing to those of us who do this work. And that's the bad news. All right. Now, There's also some good news, though. And you guys know not only my go-to source for anything college admissions, but kind of all of us in the business, our go-to source is the Chronicle of Higher Ed. So here's an article that came out September 4th by Eric Kelderman. And I'm just going to read it. I'm not going to make a lot of commentary because I really want to get to our parent panel today. But it's really important. Very, very important. So this is the title of the article. Harvard got a big win. Here are 4 quotes. Harvard University has secured an initial victory in its closely watched lawsuit against the Trump administration, with a federal judge finding the government's actions to freeze more than $2 billion in research grants violated the institution's First Amendment rights, as well as procedural requirements under civil rights law. While the administration is almost certain to appeal the ruling to the Supreme Court, legal experts say the district court's Wednesday decision provides a strong foundation for the university case going forward. So basically, the second highest court in the land sided with Harvard and said the Trump administration acted illegally and unlawfully in saying we're going to freeze over $2 billion of your money unless you do what we want you to do. Okay, article goes on to say, here are 4 key excerpts signaling how one court reacted to the Trump administration strategy for overhauling Harvard's policies, a playbook that has been used nationwide. The Trump administration used anti-Semitism as a smokescreen for a targeted ideological motivated assault on this country's premier universities. Throughout her ruling, Judge Allison D. Burroughs criticized the administration's initial explanation for freezing Harvard's funding, namely that the university had violated Title VI, the civil rights law, by doing too little to respond to anti-Semitism on campus during the protests over Israel's war in Gaza. In announcing the grant terminations to the university, federal officials provided no specific evidence of anti-Semitism, how the university's response actually violated the law, or how the grants that were cut were all related to anti-Semitism, Burroughs wrote. The idea that fighting anti-Semitism is the Trump administration's true aims is belied by the fact that the majority of the demands they are making of Harvard to restore its research funding are directed on their face at Harvard's governance, at their staffing, at their hiring practice, and their admissions policies, which have everything to do with the administration's power and political views. Instead of battling anti-Semitism, Burroughs concluded the government's actions to cancel research grants amounted to retaliation against the university for actions that are protected under the First Amendment, filing a lawsuit and rejecting the White House demands to provide broad oversight of the situation. Congress has, however, passed a law that explicitly provides for when and how an agency can terminate federal funding to address this type of discrimination. And that law is Title VI, which dictates that no such action shall be taken until the department or agency has gone through the appropriate procedures. Burroughs ruled that even if the government was seeking to penalize the university for violating federal discrimination law, it failed to take the proper procedural steps before making funding cuts, including an opportunity for voluntary resolution agreement, an administrative hearing where the university could appeal the government's findings, and a notice to Congress. The judge also dismissed the government's last-minute explanation that it was canceling grants not because of the violation, but because its new funding priorities excluded institutions that allowed anti-Semitism. That's not allowed, Burroughs wrote, because it would give the government the power to use regulation to avoid the requirements of the exact law that addresses anti-Semitism. Consistent with these obligations, this court, and likely all district courts, endeavors to follow the Supreme Court's rulings no matter how misguided it may think them to be. The juiciest part of Burroughs' ruling was contained not in the main body of her decision, but in the lengthy footnote exploring the U.S. Supreme Court's recent emergency docket ruling and said challenges to research grant cancellations had to be made in the U.S. Court of Federal Claims, which handles these contract disputes. Burroughs concluded that Harvard's case was different because the grants were canceled as a result of the government's actions that violated the university's constitutional rights. She wrote that the Supreme Court's recent emergency docket rulings regarding grant terminations have not been models of clarity. Burroughs also responded directly to Judge Neil Gorsuch, warning the district courts not to defy Supreme Court's orders on this issue. It is unhelpful and unnecessary to criticize district courts for defying the Supreme Court when they are working to find the right answer in a rapidly evolving doctrinal landscape. All right, so this decision, we're assuming the Supreme Court's going to take it up, although it's possible they don't. They could just let the lower court rule. But this decision is going to be as significant a decision for colleges as we've had in decades. So stay tuned and see what happens. But if Harvard gets $2.2 billion back, there's no reason to believe Northwesterns, the Dukes, the Pitts, University of Washington, Wisconsin, all the other schools that have been greatly affected by this will also see their money restored. And remember, these fines amount to more than all the tuition money they bring in. So that's how significant they are. So stay tuned and we'll let you know if the Supreme Court rules or if they pass on the case. All right, let's transition to the panel discussion that Lisa leads with 4 of our podcast listeners.
And now this week's interview with a special guest.
Friends, over the next 2 weeks, you're going to hear from 5 parents, all regular Your College Bound Kid listeners. They are a diverse group. The 5 parents come from the West Coast, the East Coast, the South. We have women and men. We have multiple races and ethnicities. They have different religious beliefs. There's socioeconomic diversity in our group. Some of the students are in public school and some are in independent day schools and in boarding schools. But one thing they all have in common, their student is experiencing pressure to go to a prestigious college. Now, Colleen and Serena have students who just went through the college process. Christina, Lisa, and Sharif all have students who are in the 12th grade, and they're in the middle of the process right now. I asked Lisa if she would lead this panel because I felt like, of all of our co-hosts, she has the best skill set to lead a panel like this. Lisa shares her skills as a psychologist and as a college counselor, but perhaps even more important, Lisa has a daughter who is a senior. And I know from my conversations with Lisa, her own student experiences pressure and peer pressure. Now, some may wonder, what is the purpose of having a panel like this? When I was at Dallas Theological Seminary, this nationally renowned preacher came and gave a sermon. And it was one of the most transparent sermons I've ever heard. The preacher was just so vulnerable with his own failures. I went up to him afterward and I said, I'm so impressed by your willingness to just be so real, to admit your own flaws. What motivates you to do this? I will never forget his answer. He said, man, there are a lot of people out there who are hurting. But when you're hurting and you think you're all alone and you're the only one on the ship, it can be overwhelming. But when you realize you're not alone, there are other people on the ship with you, all of a sudden you feel there is help and there is hope. So that is why we convene this panel, so that you as a parent can know you are not alone. There is help and there is hope. That is important. It's actually so important that I want to repeat it again. I think it's important. Man, there are a lot of people out there that are hurting. But when you're hurting and you think you're alone and you are the only one on the ship, it can be overwhelming. But when you realize you're not alone, that there are other people on the ship with you, all of a sudden you feel there is help and there is hope. Now, I thought all 5 of the parents did an incredible job. I want to thank all of them for their candor, insight, and transparency, and for doing what the preacher from Detroit did, letting others know there's help and there is hope. Listen and enjoy part 1.
Hi, I'm Lisa, a co-host on Your College Bound Kid, and I'm very excited today to be here with four parents who are going to help me talk about how the pressure is when your child is applying to college and the pressures and anxiety about thinking that your child might go to a prestigious university. So I'm going to just briefly introduce each of our panelists and then ask them some questions and get their sage wisdom. So I will start with Christina. Christina has a rising senior at a highly competitive boarding school in the Northeast. Colleen has two kids that she's experiencing this with. One child just graduated and is going to be going to college like in days, right, Colleen?
5 weeks.
Wow, 5 weeks. Okay, so she has a late start. And then has another child who's still in high school. And what year is that child?
11th grade.
11, so it's rising junior. So you're going again. You're going to do it again. Um, I'm happy that Serena is here. She also has a child that just graduated and is leaving for college at some point in the near future, and then has a junior, a rising junior. Is that right? And then
Yes.
your kids have attended private competitive schools. Is that correct?
Yes. Yes.
And then last but not least, we have Sharif, who has a daughter who is a rising senior at a highly competitive boarding school. And I'll just add that just to add to my personal stress level, I have a rising senior who is at a pretty competitive private day school. So the college counselors get to go through it just like everybody else. Well, thank you guys so much for coming. I really appreciate this. And so the first question is very general, but I'll start with Sharif. Sharif, where do you think that the pressure comes from that you're feeling about your child getting into a prestigious university?
That's a loaded question.
You know, I come out of the gate hot, right?
No holds barred, right? I would say from my perspective, from the experience that my wife and I have had with our daughter, at her school, that it's a two-pronged, I think, piece to that. So the first piece of it is simply the
Mhm.
peers of the fellow students that she goes to school with, watching the matriculation of the class that just finished from the prior year. It's just a buzz of where so and so is going to school, or oh, did you hear that this person got in, when they applied, at this school? And obviously, given the highly competitive nature of her school, it's kind of like a given thing that one of the reasons why they're there is, and again, I don't know, this is more perception versus reality, but the reason why they're there, or at least the purpose for which they're going through the experience that they're going through, is with the whole idea that this treasure or this prize is at the end of that journey. And I can just speak for how my daughter generally speaks. She says, I didn't go to XYZ school
Mhm.
to just go to any place university. The expectation and the aspirations for top 20 type colleges and universities, whether or not they're actually as prestigious as the name or popularity suggests. That's kind of where their heads are at when they're having these conversations.
Mhm. So you think it's like a lot of peer pressure, and it's a huge focus at your kids' school. You know, like that's like the end goal. Everyone's talking about it. And yeah, it's kind of a pressure cooker situation. Colleen, what about for you? Where do you think the pressure comes from?
I think peers is a big part of it, but I also think the media plays into it.
Mm,
And I
good
think
point.
a community that you live in can play into it as well. Like I happen to live in a fairly affluent area, and there's a lot of very educated people around that have sort of quote unquote good pedigrees. And so the expectation of like, look, my life turned out this way because I did this thing. So therefore, I want my kid to do this as well. And there's, name dropping at parties or on sweatshirts or on cars or on whatever. And so I think that the community can play a role because I think education is valued pretty highly in my community. And so even though we're at a public school, both of my kids have been at various public schools, but even so, there's still that sort of, it comes down from parents to kids. It's not just the kids. Sure. I mean, I'm sure some kids are looking up rankings, but I don't know that it started with them necessarily.
Mhm.
It came from somewhere else first. So I
Mhm.
think I think the community can play a pretty big role as well.
Yeah. You mentioned the media. What do you think the media does?
Well, I mean, I think this has been talked about on the podcast actually quite a bit, but I
Mhm.
think the idea of like people want clicks, and so you get more clicks
Yeah.
from talking about Yale and Princeton and wherever else. And so I think, and then it becomes a self-perpetuating thing, like, oh look, the admit rate at Harvard went down to 3%, and so therefore, oh my gosh, that means there's fewer spots. I also think that the reality is, I think that there's a bit of anxiety in the world right now, we'll say, about a variety of things. And I
Yeah,
think that
there's
that can
change.
it is change. And I think that that can get globalized if we're not
Mhm.
careful and really aware that our like anything we could be anxious about, it can then bleed into this college process as well.
Mhm. Serena, what do you think?
I started to notice strange things in middle school. That's sort of when this began with a kid who was always really high achieving herself, internally driven, where the whole cohort of kids she was going through school with would talk about what grades they got, compare and contrast. There was a group chat about tests, who got what. And she would brush it off in middle school like it wasn't a big deal, but how can that not be a big deal? And so I started to notice this incredible competitiveness within the school at a young age, and it just sort of spiraled. Um, so if you take a kid like her who's already so motivated and competitive and wants to do well, and you put her in an environment like that, I think it's looking back, it can be really bad. So she drove the process. She knew exactly what she wanted. And I felt like there weren't a lot of bumpers. This was my first kid going through the process, going through high school. So I stood back and did what I was supposed to do as a parent, let her make her mistakes and learn from them. But I felt like there weren't a lot of bumpers within a school for these types of kids who take on everything, all the hard classes, all the leadership positions, the captain of this, the president of this. And nobody ever said to her, wow, that's a lot. Maybe you should take a step back from something. So, and I didn't know how much time everything was going to take until we were already in it. And then she couldn't quit the stuff because she'd already committed. So it was an internal pressure, but it was also school pressure and peer pressure for
Mhm.
her.
And Christina?
So my kids started off in a certain kind of private school. We used to live in LA, and I think from the outset, there were a lot of kids whose older siblings were applying to said very competitive day school where we were. And I was like, yeah, I don't really want to participate in that. It's just looking for a very solid elementary, middle school education. We figured we'd just go to a decent public school for high school and just kind of take the easy road. But I think it depends on the kid. I think the environment that you're in and the people that you're around, and in effect, to a certain extent, the parents that you're around, it kind of trickles down, and that gets into the way they look at their life, the lens in which they look at things, and how
Mhm.
like very what they perceive as very limited resources make them really special when they are selected for certain things. I think that becomes perpetuated as they grow up because she's away from home. I think my perspective is a little bit different. She's very like, I have no say in what she does, she chooses to do or chooses not to do at this point. But there's something very ingrained into the way that she looks at things at this point, where she is very fixated on like
Yeah.
highly selective school X, where the admit rate is sub 5%, mean equals better. And I'm like, if you look at those numbers, numbers can be easily manipulated, and they're manipulated for particular reasons that are not in the interest of the student. They're
Oh yeah.
really in the interest of the institution. And you need to have the maturity or the discipline to separate yourself from that number. And so that's what I struggle with her with, because I'm like, fit is a very different kind of thing.
Mhm.
Fit doesn't mean selectivity, doesn't mean it's exclusionary. Like, you need to find the best place for yourself. But I think in the same way that when we were at this this private school, that fixation on that, and then where she is now, the fixation on, I think it just attracts a certain kind of kid, and it just kind of, and it just exasperates that mentality where it's
Mhm.
they all kind of flock with that same lens. Like, it has to be number one, has to be the best, or has to have some 5 acceptance rate. That makes it just validates all of the reasons why they do those things. um I don't know, it's a community thing. It's a way that the kids are raised. And I think, to Colleen's point as well, like, it is the community. There's this a trickle down view that kind of gets passed on to the kids. And then I think without the proper, adults in the room, you can get kind of lost, and the kids kind of take that, and it's just, they do their own thing with it.
Mhm.
So it is definitely something that we're struggling with, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and this question is for anyone who wants to jump in. So you've talked about, like, it seems like all of your kids have in one way or another been, experiencing this kind of stress, maybe surrounded in situations where it's really prevalent. What's that like for you emotionally as parents? Is it, worrisome? Is it stressful? I'm just curious, like, how that all sits with you. I know how it sits with me. It's not great. But I'm just wondering how it feels.
I think it
Uh,
feels like you're swimming upstream.
What do you mean?
In the sense that if we try to say, hey, look, like it is about fit, or there are lots of really good schools out there that you've never heard of, right? But there really are, and we really believe that. It just feels like you're having to push against this flow of input from the community, from the friends. I do think friends, especially for my younger child, are really influential. I mean, he's
Oh,
just a junior and he's already like, oh, these are the schools that are acceptable from my friends. And I'm like, oh, we're gonna have to talk about that. But just so I just feel like you're having to push against sort of this current that wants to keep pushing them into the, oh, these are the acceptable places, and having to say, no, let's reconsider. No, let's reconsider. So it's a very ongoing conversation.
yeah.
But
And,
it's
I think
hard.
that teens tend to focus more on what their peers think than what adults think. So, I mean, not only are you fighting the situation, you're fighting biology, like neurobiology, and that
Right.
I, yeah, I fight neurobiology all the time, and I lose 100% of the time. But Christina, you were going to say something.
you know, I didn't go to tradition. I mean, I went to school, but I think my major was very non-traditional. So, in the same concerns that you have about your daughter living in your basement, I was that art major. So, like, this conformity issue isn't really, it didn't really play by these rules. So I'm like watching my kid, and I'm like, why are you signing up for this? I don't really understand. Like, just go be yourself. And she's like trying so hard to do those things that everybody else is trying to do. I'm like, life is too short for this. Like, I don't, you will all get to where you need to be. My husband, we all went to, a decent school, and we sit next to people who went to, HYP schools, and that's fine, whatever. But we all are sitting in the same place, getting the same amount of money. Like, at the end of the day, the outcome wasn't different. maybe on college sweatshirt day, it was, I'm like, I'm choosing to go where I'm going, and that's totally fine. Like, you go and do your thing, and that's totally cool too. Have a great time. Like, I don't really, we've always, my husband and I have always kind of bucked the system in that way. And I
Mhm.
don't know, I guess you end up with the ones that are not like you, and some
Oh,
maybe they
always.
felt like,
It's life teaching you a lesson, right? So many
I guess
lessons.
so.
I think that the compare and contrast culture now among teens is so different than when we grew up
Mhm.
that I can't even imagine what it's like for them. I can't, you have it at school and then you have it online on social media. So it never ends. And it's exhausting. It must be exhausting for them. So, and they don't want to listen to what we have to say in high school when they're in high school. They don't believe it until they experience it themselves. So it's just so different now.
Yeah, I would just add in that from my experience, everything you guys are saying are 100% spot on. The peer groups, the relationships, the friend groups that they call them now, weighs very heavily, and it influences, the perception that my daughter and her friends have about certain institutions. I think that, I've kind of made a policy that once my daughter got into high school, I would take a step back from being this father, do as I say, because I'm your parent, to more of, okay, I'm someone who you consult. Like, I give advice, and I put the decision ultimately in her hands, because she has to, make these decisions and deal, go through some of those experiences, to live and learn, to grow. And when we're having these conversations, the like I said, the two things that I have in my kind of repertoire is that my wife went to a very, high, level university. I did as well. So, like, that brings another level of pressure, but it also brings another level of validity. So when we say things, because we both went to these, top, 20, top 30 universities, um, some of the things that we share from our perspective does hold weight. I also teach as an adjunct professor at a top, university. So that's not what I do. I do it. I'm not adjunct, but I do teach. So I also bring that experience to bear, when I'm having conversations with my daughter. However, again, bringing the experience from the industry that my daughter is seeking to go into, and helping her to understand that, hey, here's a school that you may not have on your radar, but you know what? Their alumni are walking up and down the hallways of this organization, and they do very well. As far as their representation at the highest levels at some of the top firms, that helps to bring some things into perspective. But again, I try my best not to be a lecturer. I try to just share information, kind of help bring some experiences to bear to help her kind of round out, her perspectives on issues. But you're right, it is definitely swimming upstream, and it's hard when you're trying to, like I said, be a parent, but at the same time, try to take a step back and not necessarily be overbearing, because, when you do that, they tend to, tune you out. So it's definitely a balancing act.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like all four of you would like love it if your child would be a little more, or maybe was, for the people whose kids have graduated and made their decisions, been a little more open-minded, and would consider other institutions other than like the T20 that everyone cares about. Is that correct? But your child was a bit resistant to that sort of thinking. Is that correct?
I feel that mostly for my younger kid. My older
Hmm.
kid, she um, is planning on double majoring, but the primary major that she was searching for was dance. And so
Oh, well,
dance has
that's,
its
yeah.
own hierarchy. And
Hmm.
so honestly, that played in our favor on some level because she was able to say, well, these are the top dance schools. And they weren't the same. They're not,
Right.
most of them,
Hmm.
all of them really are not T20 schools. And so I think that helped, although she had her own,
Hmm.
we looked at academic schools in case the dance thing didn't work out too. So she had both sides, but she was able to at
Hmm.
least see beyond those rankings a bit
Hmm.
because of her own interests.
Hmm. Yeah, that's interesting because I think one of the things that I have noticed, not so much among YCBK listeners or the parents of the kids that I work with, but sort of out in the world, is that there's kind of a hyper competitiveness among parents as well about where their kids go to school, and maybe I'm looking at this from the outside. So I'm imagining people are thinking, oh, look, my kid got into Harvard. Like, I'm a great parent. I succeeded. I, did a great job. When we all know, being educated about the college admissions process here, that there's 8 million factors, most of which were not under either the child's or the parents' control, that, may have helped that kid get into Harvard. I have perceived from other parents through the course of my life that parents can be competitive almost with other parents about where kids go to school.
Oh,
And I was just wondering if that was just me, like I'm just projecting all over on these parents, or if you guys have also maybe run across those situations.
I see it and I stayed very far away from it, which has really made my social circle, I'm being completely transparent,
Hmm.
very small with the school parents. I just can't participate with that type of mayhem. Imagine, it makes me really realize what the kids are going through, because that's what's happening in her peers' homes, is that kind
Right.
of pressure. So it's like crazy to me. Yeah, it's there, but and it's hard to stay away from.
Yeah. Anybody else?
I saw it when we were looking at elementary schools. I saw it when we were looking at high schools.
Yeah.
I'm seeing it now, but it's not as pronounced now because my daughter's not actually living at home.
Hmm.
But I think every time we've gone through this, I basically, like Serena, I stop talking to people. I just hide.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, it's not a conversation I want to engage in. I tell my daughter, like, just keep your head down, just focus on what's important to you. And all the rest of it's noise. And that's literally where I am as well. So I probably haven't really had many conversations with other adults who are her grade, yeah, I'm just not talking to anybody.
Sharif, have you experienced that?
I've had some interesting observations over, let's say, the past year, and probably a little glimpse from the year before, where maybe I would hear a certain amount of chatter where parents spoke about, like T20 type schools for their kids. And as they went through the process, and then certain realities come to, came, basically to realization, maybe their kids didn't wind up at those type of schools. So there was definitely like like a humbling, so to speak, that process that occurred. Maybe that just speaks to how competitive, the
Hmm.
process is. I just really tried to look at it and really kind of, and like Serena said, to try to stay away from it, simply because, you know, they is really the truth that, comparison is the thief of joy,
Hmm.
and that, your child's journey is that child's journey, and you really have to, tap into that person and really help them, go through the process in a way that, works for you and your family. and really try your best to block out the noise. I mean, I can't keep the noise blocked out on my daughter's side, but at the same
Hmm.
time, the things that we can control is, the conversations that we have. And when, conversations do come up about, highly selective schools or just the college process, to really make it, to kind of make the conversation more about, well, how do you feel? Are you feeling anxious? Why don't we, put that in the back burner for now? Because again, you're doing so much, and these are not, the things that you need to, you know, dwell upon, day in and day out. But it's hard, and,
Yeah.
and we try our best to try to put some balance, to and some sanity to, the things that they're going through.
Yeah. I'm glad that you guys have also seen that, and it's not just me being paranoid or crazy. Um, and I like whenever I go to my daughter's school and they'll have like college night, and I'm sitting in that auditorium and I could just feel everyone's collective anxiety. Like it's almost like herd anxiety, like a herd of horses, like one of them spooks and they're like, I don't know what that's about. We better all run, right? I feel like people have that too. And I will just start feeling really, really anxious, and the parents will be raising questions about, well, you obviously have to get straight A's. I mean, this is like not an easy school to get straight A's in either. It's not like a foregone conclusion that you would. And you have to get straight A's and you have to get these test scores. And I'm just sitting there like, oh God, oh God. And I keep having to tell myself, like, this isn't true. This isn't true. Like, I have an older child. I literally lived through a whole thing and saw it turn out fine. Like, this isn't true. But even I, like with all of that experience and what I do every day, still struggle to contain my anxiety. So unfortunately, I think I've taken the avoidance tactic as well of just not talking to people or about college with people at the school that are parents, because it just
Yeah.
seems like it's so many landmines, and life seems hard enough as it is without that. I wonder what it's like for kids who do have those parents, though, that are putting that kind of pressure on them. Because you guys, like, you're at least trying to talk your kids out of it. Like, they kind of, if they don't get into, like, whatever school that they were wanting to, they don't have to go home feeling like my parents are going to be disappointed in me. But I just wonder what it's like for the kids who have parents who sort of are fully invested in that worldview. It's got to be so hard.
I think
So,
actually one of the reasons why I see these things the way I do is at the time that we were applying to high schools was COVID, and I had some friends who had older kids who were applying to schools during COVID, and we were sitting at a one of these like accepted students days, and the parents were like absolutely distraught because they had expectations of their kids going to an HYP, and that was just not the outcome. And it didn't make any sense to me. But I mean, the parents were just so upset. And my thought was, but you had your chance. You went to where you went. This is your kid's life. Like, you're not, this is their experience. Like, it just did not, it really resonated with me to be a sign of like, this is not how we're going to do this. I had my
mhm,
chance. This is my child's time to do their thing. I mean, the thing that I truly struggle with though is my kid wants something that I don't necessarily
Mm.
think is awesome. And
Yeah.
as much as I want to support them in the thing that they want, I personally don't think it's the best thing, but I don't want to tell them no. And I feel like it's my job as the parent to keep those doors open for them so they can have what they want and they're not disappointed because of anything that I've done.
Right.
But at the end of the day, it's not what I think is the best experience. So I don't know, maybe somebody who has older children who are going through this process, who have gone through this process, how do you handle that part?
mhm. Well, I think you really hit a nerve, because Christina, because I saw a lot of head nodding. So, anyone else want to jump in on their experience with what Christina is saying, that like your kid is really invested in a process that you're not sure is great for them, but you don't want to stand in their way?
I think it came down for us to, do you really want to potentially do the same thing for another 4 years of
Mm.
high competition classmates, high stress? Do you really want to do the same thing again? I mean, and we said that a lot. And I think ultimately for her, she found the right match. And I do think she's going to be successful and I think it will be great. But there were times where I was really nervous and I think it's all going to work out. So I do feel better now, but I mean, she could have gone to the flagship state school with 2 years of college under her belt
Mhm.
for free and get paid and da 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 and da 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 da. And she's still choosing to do, what she wanted to do, which is one credit and 4 years of college and, everything but that's truly who I think she is. So I feel better about it now, but we definitely expressed those hesitancies to her throughout the process. And
Mhm.
I'm very hopeful that it all works out. But it's scary and it hurts my heart to think like that because I do feel like that at times.
Colleen, or have you experienced that throughout your children's process?
So my older kid is actually sort of, uh, she applied, so I'll say this. She applied to schools that had ranged from a like got into schools that had from a 7% acceptance rate to a 90 plus, right? And so she had a super wide breadth of schools and she's sort of anti-prestige. She feels like it's contrived. I mean, so she was less driven, but I think about my son. And so I think about when he right now is really driven by prestige, really, really. And I don't know that I have great answers, except I asked my daughter before I came onto this, like, hey, like, were there things that we did that helped? And she said, well, you didn't try to live vicariously through me, and that was nice. And so
Mhm.
I didn't feel pressure to have to choose the 7% acceptance rate school I got into because you weren't saying, oh, I want you to go there. That was one thing she said. And the other thing she said is the expectation that you had of me was not that I was going to choose that whatever that highest ranked school or the lowest admit rate, whatever you want to say, school, but that you would let me choose the one that I thought was best for me. And that was hard for her. This isn't really answering your question, but I think this will still prove the point.
Mhm.
She came to me probably, well, two things. One, when she first got her first admittance rate to a school that she was looking at for dance, which has an overall acceptance rate that's in the 90s. And
Mhm.
she had heard from a friend of hers after she was really excited, like, I got into wherever. And the person said, oh, I talked to our mutual friend who said, oh, you could do better than that. Like, that was the
Ugh.
response. And she
Mhm.
was like, and then all of a sudden, my kid who didn't care about prestige, every single school that she had applied to, she looked up to see what's the acceptance rate of this school, because she
Yeah.
knew that she was being judged by her friends. And these are her friends who care about her. I believe they genuinely do. But she still felt that pressure. And then later on in the process, she'd committed to a school, but it wasn't the most selective school she got into. And there were others that were better known in the country. And she said, Mom, I can't wait to go to college because I'm tired of justifying my choice to people.
Friends, this concludes the first part of our panel discussion. We hope you join us next week for the final part. On Thursday's episode, Vince and I will talk about a hot topic in the news. And then we'll continue the conversation with our panel, Susan, Hillary, and Julia, looking at the secondary school report part 2 of 3. Then we'll have a brand new interview. It's a college spotlight. We're going to the Northeast. We're talking to the chief enrollment officer at Boston College, Grant Gosselin, and it's a 4-parter. You'll hear part 1 of 4. And friends, remember, it's not where you go. It's not where you go. It's not where you go. It's what you do when you get there. It's what you do when you get out of there. That is what will determine your career success. See you on Thursday, friends. And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. If you find this podcast helpful, please follow us and you will get every single episode as soon as they are released. If you want to support our podcast, you can click the share button and send it to your friends and acquaintances. You can say positive things about your college-bound kid on your social media feed. And you can help us stay commercial-free and pay our staff by donating on the yourcollegeboundkid website. You can write a review for us on Apple or Spotify. And if you have a question or a recommendation, just go to speakpipe.com/YCBK, hit the orange button, and speak. We will do our best to get your question in your own voice on an upcoming episode. I am the producer of the podcast, and I live in Metro Atlanta. We have a fantastic team that has over 200 years of admissions and counseling experience. Shout out to our co-hosts, Dr. Lisa Ruff in North Carolina, Susan Tree in Pennsylvania, Vince Garcia in California, Julia Esquivel in Massachusetts, Linda Depker in Missouri, Andy Strickler, the Chief Enrollment Officer at Connecticut College, New London, Connecticut, Hillary Dickman, an Admission Officer at Colorado College in Colorado Springs, and our International Admissions Expert, Kevin Newton in Dallas, Texas. Our sensational sound engineer is Nemanja Matvich. Our amazing music is from Victor Allen Weeks. Marketing designs from Kimberly Bloss. Our reliable webmaster is Stylionis Dimitru. Website updates are done by Joyce Stucker. Our image editor is Vlad Honchar. If you want to have a coaching session with me, just text me at 404-664-4340. If you want to reach someone else on our team, all of our bios with contact info can be found at yourcollegeboundkid.com under the About YCBK tab. If you want to get our free monthly YCBK newsletter, YCBK Plus, it is also under the About YCBK tab. If you want to see our recommended books and websites, they are on our website under the Resources tab. While you're on our website, check out our hundreds of interviews in their entirety. Check out our college spotlights, our blog, and our upcoming events. We think of you as our listening family, and we look forward to meeting with you every single Monday and every single Thursday.